Right. So, how does the Fed change the money supply? We talked about how it can increase or decrease the money supply, but we haven't really talked about how it goes about doing that. So, I'm going to start with kind of the less common ones, and then we'll end up with the big one that we use the most. So, one thing they can do is they can change the reserve requirement. Now, we said that the reserve requirement's around 10%. Now, if we wanted them to loan um, more money, we could decrease the reserve requirement, say to 5%. Okay. And that's going to have a pretty dramatic effect on the money supply if banks are willing to loan out that extra money. Um, and we can do the same thing by increasing the reserve requirement. We go, hey, you've got to keep more money on hand. So now they have to loan less money out. Um, so again, decreasing the reserve requirement increases loans and increases the money supply. Increasing the reserve requirement decreases the amount that they're able to loan. Now, this is not something the Federal Reserve touches very often because it's not really good at keeping banks stable. Banks need to be able to make long-term decisions based on this reserve requirement. So the Fed doesn't usually touch this one. Um, the Fed can also change its discount rate, basically changing how cheap is it going to be if I need to borrow money from the Federal Reserve. Now, if I lower the discount rate, then if I'm at a bank and I get in a pinch and I'm like, oh, I don't have enough money, I can always go out to the Fed. And if the rate's really cheap, I haven't really been punished very much for not having reserves on hand. So that's going to encourage me to loan and loan and loan because I know I always have the Fed there who I can borrow from at a pretty cheap rate. Now, if the Fed increases that rate, and I know it's going to be very expensive to get a loan from the Fed, then maybe I'm going to loan a little bit less. Because if I have to loan less, then because if I loan less, then I'm less likely to have to take out a loan from the Fed if I get in a pinch. Okay. Now, this one is a little more common. During the 2008 recession, we basically pushed the discount rate to almost zero, really, 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 really low. Okay. Um, Finally, we have what's called open market operations. Now, open market operations is the buying and selling of treasury bonds, okay, government debt. So whenever you hear, oh, the government's in debt, well, what they do is they sell these treasury bonds, and in return, they receive the cash that we run the country with. Now, why would you buy one of these bonds? Well, you're going to receive this money back plus a bit of interest. At least in the US, this is considered a pretty safe bet. Um, we've basically never defaulted on this, so it doesn't get very high returns because it's a safe bet, but it's better than just sitting there with just money. Now, let's say that you're a bank and you're holding these treasury bonds, and the Fed comes in and buys these bonds from you. Um, Now, if they buy these bonds, then all of a sudden you have this cash. And you have all this cash that you can now loan out if you want. So it increases the money supply. Um, Now, on the opposite hand, let's say that the Federal Reserve also holds a lot of these treasury bonds. And let's say that they sell them to you, sell them to the bank. Well, the bank is buying them with money. So that's taking money out of the banking system. And now they're holding these treasury bonds instead. So this is going to decrease the money supply. It's going to decrease the amount they're allowed to lend. Now, something you need to notice on all three of these, the Fed actually doesn't have direct control over the money supply because all three of these are contingent on banks loaning money. And that was one of the big kind of weird things that happened in 2008 is that the Federal Reserve said, here, take all this money. But the problem was these banks looked around. They didn't really find anybody to loan the money to. They'd already been loaning money like crazy, and they were already realizing, wow, we probably shouldn't have loaned money to all of these different people. So this is kind of contingent on them having, good places to to give loans to. Okay, so these are the three ways that the Federal Reserve can increase and decrease the money supply.